Hey guys, welcome to this video where I'll be sharing my honest thoughts on the Mamiya RZ67 and I'll be explaining why it's my favorite camera for portrait photography. I will also be discussing what I like and don't like about this camera, as well as showing you some sample photos to hopefully give you a better idea of whether this camera might be for you and your photographic needs. So if you do enjoy this video, please consider subscribing, and if you have any questions regarding this camera, then feel free to leave a comment down below. So this is a medium format SLR camera that takes a 6x7 negative, so essentially you have 10 photos per roll of 120 film. I bought the RZ back in 2018 for a really affordable price, as I had the intention of doing more portrait work and I was also starting my first photo project at the time. The concept of this project was photographing portraits of strangers, and I knew that shooting 35mm or digital wasn't the look I was going for. I really wanted something with a high quality feel while also having that film aesthetic, so a medium format camera was the best choice. So my setup at the time included the 110 f2.8 lens, and it also came with an additional polaroid back, which I'm yet to use. It does also use a waist level finder, so you actually look down into the mirror rather than looking through an eyepiece like you would on most other cameras. It will change up your compositions for sure, as you're shooting from a lower vantage point, but I liked not being able to hide behind a camera. So although this adjustment was one that I really liked, it does mean that your perspective is completely flipped, so left is right and right is left, but don't let that scare you. With some practice it'll become second nature, and after a while you won't even notice any difference. But if this is still an issue for you, then there's always the prism finder attachment, which makes it an eye level camera. This also corrects the perspective back to what most cameras are like, so that might be something to think about if this really bothers you. Another feature I love about this camera is the bellows focusing system. So on most other cameras you have to twist the lens to get focus, but with the RZ you actually twist this little knob on the side to get that really perfect focus. It's such a smooth process and just slows down your shooting just a little bit, as it always takes a little bit of extra time to get focus using this system. So the minimum focusing distance on this camera is also really good. It obviously depends on what lens you're using, but in my case I'm using the 90mm, so I can focus on anything after 43cm away from the camera, allowing me to get nice and close to my subject and get those detail shots. Whereas when I'm using my Mamiya 7 for example, those kinds of shots are near impossible as the distance is over a meter away. So this is a modular camera and can be customized to however you choose. As I said at the start of this video, there are multiple backs available for this camera, like the polaroid one for example. This is also super handy if you want to shoot a few film stops at the same time, so black and white and color for example, as you can just swap out the backs whenever you want without having to finish off the roll. I've never used another back personally, but this might interest some people as it's a feature not a lot of film cameras have, so that's definitely something to think about. So speaking about the backs just briefly, this camera allows you to rotate the back to shoot either portrait or landscape orientation, which is super convenient. Although it's only a small thing, not having to flip the whole camera to change perspective, it is a nice change up compared to most cameras. Especially if you are using a tripod, just being able to rotate the back rather than fiddling around with your tripod head is super handy. Another feature worth noting is the multiple exposure mode. It's as simple as flicking a switch and then you're able to shoot as many exposures as you like on a single frame. I personally don't do this, but I know a lot of people love this way of shooting, so that might be something for you. It really allows you to get creative in your photos and portrait shooting, so I'd really recommend giving it a try if it interests you. So as I mentioned previously, I have the 110 f2.8, which I would say is the most common lens used for portraiture work on this camera. It's the only lens that actually goes down at 2.8, allowing you to get that dreamy looking bokeh, but keep in mind that due to demand, this lens is the most expensive one for the RZ, but there are some great alternatives out there. My 110 is actually broken at the moment, so I am using the 90mm f3.5, which I actually prefer. Having a little bit of lens distortion really appeals to me, as I think it gives a more of a cinematic feel, and it's also around half the price of the 110 on the second-hand market. I will just quickly add that being a medium format sensor, the focal length of the lenses is around half of that in full frame, so my 90mm equates to 44mm on a full frame camera. There are obviously lots of other lenses out there in the Seiko Z lineup, which is the proper name used for these lenses in the RZ system, but you can actually use the Seiko C lenses, which you would use on the Mamiya 645 and the Mamiya RZ67 using a separate adapter. This is definitely something to think about, especially if you're on a budget and you really want that RZ but you can't really afford to fork out the extra money for the newer lenses. Then using these older lenses, ones you might already have had in the past, is definitely a great bonus to have. So now onto the things I don't really like about the RZ, which I think you should be aware of. So one of the biggest downsides to this camera, which I've mentioned so many times in this channel, is its size and weight. Initially, this camera was made to be a purely studio-based camera, which makes total sense. Everything about this camera just works in a studio environment, but as soon as you take it on location, it changes entirely. Weighing in at just under 4 kilos, moving around with this camera can be super difficult, and it makes traveling quite limiting. I've done a few overseas trips, and there would be days where I wouldn't even take it out due to its size, which meant I wasn't taking any photos. It barely fits in my bag, which is okay, but when you add all your other equipment in, that bag will get so heavy and will be the biggest pain to move around with. So my recommendation is, if you plan on traveling with this type of camera format, I'd probably suggest some lighter alternatives like a Mamiya 7 or even the Hasselblad 500cm, as they are a lot more practical to move around with. And it's a bit of a shame that this is such a big factor for me because the quality is so amazing, but after doing it a couple of times, I refuse to take it any further than I have to. In saying this though, if medium format travel photography isn't really your thing, then it might not bother you a whole lot. If you're doing portraits or even landscapes locally, and you're able to drive your car or catch public transport, then moving around with this camera probably won't be as big of an issue. It's still more portable than a 4.5 large format camera system, for example, and a lot of people use them without any problems. But then again, shooting with this camera for a few hours will really start to hurt your hands and neck, so I would really suggest either getting a grip or using a tripod when you're out using the RZ. So another thing that puts a lot of people off is the price tag that's associated with this camera. So as I said at the start of this video, I was lucky enough to get the RZ at a really affordable price, but since then the demand has gone crazy and prices have skyrocketed. It's really become out of reach for a lot of people, and to be honest, if I was buying an RZ at today's price, I would probably suggest looking at some alternatives. Even the older model, the Mamiya RZ67, might be a better option if price is a big issue for you. It has most of the same features and shoots the same negative, so the quality is pretty much the same, but it comes in at just a fraction of the price. I'm not going to go into too much detail as this isn't a comparison video, but I would highly suggest looking to that camera first before you think about buying that RZ. But as I said in my Mamiya 7 Honest Thoughts video, film camera prices are always going up, so it's always better to buy it sooner rather than later, because landing a good deal is pretty rare. You're more than likely always going to have to pay more than you probably should, so just keep that in mind. And worst case, if you buy it and you don't like it, then you can always sell it and make your money back. And the very last downside to this camera is that it does require an external light meter. So this is only a small thing, but it's just another piece of gear you have to take with you at all times, and it's also very expensive to buy one brand new. So I'd recommend buying one secondhand, or some people tend to use an app on their phone, but to be honest, I probably wouldn't trust that. I've had bad results using them in the past, but it's definitely an option out there if that's the path you decide to go down. So in summary, this is an amazing camera, and I recommend it to everyone looking to improve their portraiture work. With its sharp lenses, modular build, and interesting focusing system, it really will change the way you make images, which will hopefully be advantageous to your process. With the only downside really being the weight and size and the external light meter, I really don't see a reason why someone wouldn't get this camera, apart from the price reasons. I would say it's definitely saving up for, but if it's out of your budget, then as I said, I would definitely recommend looking into the older model, the Mamiya RZ67. So I hope you are a little more informed whether the Mamiya RZ67 is beneficial to you and your photographic process. It's definitely one of my favorite cameras, and it's one that I never plan on selling. If you did enjoy this video, please consider subscribing, as I have lots more of these types of videos planned for the future. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.